Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this panel. My name is Wirdum. I'm a journalist. I work for Bitcoin Magazine, and I'm joined by three Bitcoin core developers, former Bitcoin core developer, sort of core developer. I'll let you guys introduce yourself. Yeah, go for it, Tadge.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tadge Dryja. I've been working on Bitcoin for quite some time. Wrote some people might know, the Lightning Network, so that was cool. People like Lightning now, woo. Discrete log contracts, which is a bunch of startups are starting to use it, do smart contracts, and UTXO, which is a way to make Bitcoin sort of core nodes, fully validated nodes, lighter and faster. I'm currently working at a company called Lightspark, so still working on Lightning stuff, trying to make Bitcoin better. That's what I do.
Right. Hey everyone, I'm Jeremy. I'm a maybe former Bitcoin Core contributor. I did a lot of work on adding more programmability to Bitcoin so you can have more smart contracts. Right now I'm taking a little bit of a break, so otherwise I'm just Taproot Wizards number 13.
Hi everyone, my name is Amiti. I focus on Bitcoin Core and the peer-to-peer network where I care a lot about privacy and security.
All right, so we're going to touch on a potentially maybe slightly controversial topic today, so I'm excited about that. I don't know about you guys, but maybe I'm the only one going to have fun on the stage today. We'll see. I'll start with a little bit of context. So a couple years ago, there was the block size wars, and it was a very controversial, heated time where different factions had different ideas on how to scale Bitcoin. And it really became kind of like a trench war. Now that was eventually solved. So we got the SegWit upgrade, so we got a block size increase, and also through SegWit we got Lightning, so that's a lot of scalability. However, it's not really solved at this point. Scaling is not really solved. And the main reason for that is even if you want to use Lightning, you still need a UTXO. So you still need at least, at the bare minimum, one chunk of Bitcoin recorded on the blockchain, which requires a transaction. Now, the number of transactions is still limited, so there can only be that many UTXOs. If you do the sort of back of a napkin math, it will take decades before everyone can be onboarded on Lightning. So I want to know, how are Bitcoin developers thinking about scalability today? And especially, a lot of people are talking about ossification. So if we have ossification, then we definitely can't all have a UTXO. So how are developers thinking about this? Is there a future where everyone has a UTXO specifically? Tadge, do you want to start?
Sure. Not to be too cynical, but a lot of times developers aren't. I would say there's a much less focus on these kinds of questions today than there was 6 or 7 years ago, right? So there's a lot of super important work people are doing on peer-to-peer transport encryption and package relay and all these really important things, and that's great. But it has the sort of idea of like, hey, let's do scaling things and all these extension blocks or this or that. That's not something that really comes up a lot. I guess the closest thing would probably be some of the contract stuff and tap leap update verify, like those kind of things that like Jeremy also works on. But it's not, I guess, at the forefront of people's minds, and I think it should be. I sometimes am sort of bugging, like, hey, we didn't quite, but a big reason is like no one wants to go there, right? It was such a mess this 6 or whatever years ago that it's like, okay, we now have something that kind of works, and we're getting there, and so people don't really want to bring that up again. But I think
that's why we're bringing it up.
Yeah.
So I might take a little bit of a hard line on this, and I'd be willing to go as far as to say if we can't deliver a UTXO for every single person who wants one, Bitcoin isn't a system worth building. Bitcoin exists as a human rights platform, and anybody who needs to express their human rights should be able to do that. And if we can't, as a system, give everybody, the privacy, the self-sovereignty over their money supply, then I think that we're failing, and we need to maybe explore other ways of getting there. So that, for me, is the big tension between this ossification and scaling, is we have to scale or the system's not worth its salt.
Yeah, there.
Thank you.
There's the popular not your keys, not your coins mantra, but it's completely incompatible with ossification, is what you're saying essentially. So some sort of choice has to be made there. And Tadge, you're saying Bitcoin developers don't even want to go there.
It's definitely something people discuss and stuff, but it is sort of this, not the main focus a lot. You'd agree, it's not the main focus.
It's challenging. I think the most, prominent developers that are interested in contributing are interested in having the deep thought and looking at the system from a very technical lens. And trying to ask those same people to participate in very political conversations is a very big ask. Some of the thinkers in this space are really, really incredible thinkers and are doing it just because they're passionate about the cause. But we all have to wear like so many different hats, and I think the level of politics that has come into the realm when you're just trying to build a system that works deters tons of people, and it's for good reason. And so I think the claims for ossification are really challenging because from a technical lens, it feels extremely unrealistic. Scalability is one part, but even from my lens of like privacy and security, which often become the same thing, because if your government can identify your name and your physical address based on your on-chain transactions, then that can make it so that you cannot participate in Bitcoin. And so while it might look like privacy to some people in some situations, it is genuinely a security concern. And so in order to be able to keep playing that game, we want to develop and advance our solutions from the security lens as Bitcoin becomes more proliferated in the world. And that is in contrast to ossification, let alone the question of scalability, which we have a very clear case for why we need to make some like big changes in order to have the vision of Bitcoin actually be played out. Like, there's a way we can scale Bitcoin right now through centralized solutions, but would that still be Bitcoin?
Yeah, so can we talk about what are some potential changes that Bitcoin would need? Do you guys have a vision on that, or an idea on that?
Sure. I mean, well, you guys can talk about it, but like one of the things I've been working on for a couple of years is called UTXO. It's not as well known, I guess, because a lot of it was like, I didn't really give talks because of COVID and whatever, but it's a way to make running a fully validating node much smaller and more compact. I don't know, so I can't really see the audience, but like who has Bitcoin? And everyone's gonna be like, yeah. And then like who runs a full node? Maybe less, right? Like probably still a lot of people here. And so that's one of the things we've been worried about for years is like, why do people not run full nodes? Is it harder? Is it that it needs a lot of computation? Is it just the UI? So UTXO it takes up a lot less space. You still have fully validating nodes, but it takes up very little space on your computer. So I was like, oh, this is great. Maybe this will get more people to run it. And then maybe if we have really low hardware requirements for running fully validating nodes, that does relax a lot of the constraints we have. And maybe other scalability solutions can go. I don't want to say the BLOKSIZE increase word on stage or anything, but like those are some things that we were talking about for years and now don't really want to talk about anymore. But maybe we could if the hardware constraints and software and all these research like shows that it's possible. Yeah.
So I think one thing that I would add to that is it's pretty clear that at the base layer, Bitcoin needs substantially more programmability than is available right now in order to give people a not L1, but fully self-sovereign experience of the chain through a second layer. And what I see in the community is a lot of debate around, well, like what's the smallest possible, least aggressive change we could make to get the maybe little bit useful bit of functionality to do like maybe one of these ideas. And I've participated previously in that role of saying like, well, maybe I can make an argument for a very small amount of functionality that will punch above its weight class. I kind of failed at that to deliver that to the community last year. And I think overall the long-term thing is we really need to figure out how to deliver that maximal amount of functionality so that we can actually build the tools that people need to use Bitcoin. And I don't think that we're going to build it in a way where we're projecting the exact use case in a central planned way and then building backwards from that the primitives to support it. I think we need to build the platform first and then allow anybody to build what they want to build to scale Bitcoin's humanitarian goals.
Just to be clear for me and for the audience, so do you see CTV as a scaling solution as well, or are you looking at it more as a functionality thing?
It's absolutely a scaling solution. I had 4 goals, which is privacy, scalability, sort of self-sovereignty and decentralization, and all the work that I did was around demonstrating how CTV helps in each of those categories. And if it doesn't help each of those categories, then it still could be okay, but like that's what any upgrade should be focused on, is improving those pillars of Bitcoin.
All right, Amiti, did you have any vision for scaling, any ideas in that sense?
I don't have a particular solution, but I just want to kind of highlight the idea that I think we do, as a community, need to be comfortable with making big changes. Bitcoin is still extremely young, and for this vision of what it can be to be freedom money, then we still have a long way to go at a technical base layer. And it's really cool to see the ecosystem growing and expanding, but if we want the people who need Bitcoin the most to be able to access it, then at the base layer of Bitcoin builders, we need to actually encourage more radical thought and interesting conversation and debate rather than discourage it.
I think one thing that kind of adds on to that is that like changes aren't bad changes are bad.
Yeah.
Like, let's just be clear. So if there are good changes, then we should kind of actually really work on that. And just because it's changed doesn't mean that it's bad.
And I could say even so, the most recent change, Taproot, which now is active, people can use it, all these things, even that had almost unanimous agreement, but still took years. And I sort of talked about this as like, imagine everyone agrees on where we're going for dinner. We're all going to this pizza place. And then you spend 2 years saying, well, okay, but what if someone gets there first and no one else is there, and then they think not other people are coming and then they leave? Or what if there's a traffic? And it's just, even when it's a really high agreement, it's very hard to change these things. And I do worry that like ossification isn't necessarily a goal, but it sort of feels like that kind of thing happens just as the system gets bigger and you get more people involved.
So do any of these solutions have technical consensus? And really, secretly, my question is, what is technical consensus? I mean, Jeremy, maybe you want to weigh in this first because you've been through the experience.
So I think that there are different ways of measuring technical consensus, and the Bitcoin community hasn't really adopted any single defined measure. Certain people certainly feel like they are technical consensus and they have in their head they know, and if like they don't know, then it's not there. There are other methods other communities do, which is like anybody's free to say that they have technical consensus, and if somebody really wants to disagree on merit, they can disagree, otherwise it kind of has technical consensus. But generally, at least in my view, which may or may not be correct, is that you have to do the job, or whatever committee is working on something has to do the job of listening to what everybody is saying and judging based on all the feedback you've received, is the thing actually meeting that? Whether or not you agree with their feedback, are you meeting what they're doing? And that's what I felt that I had, but other people disagreed with that notion of technical consensus and thought it was more of a thing of people have to explicitly say that they are ready to activate this change. When if I talk to them about it, they might say, oh, I just don't want to think about consensus upgrades right now. And that's not really it's saying, okay, so I won't look at what you've said about consensus upgrades, I'll look at what you've said about the technical requirements for this type of upgrade. I think that you would be happy with this if you're ready to talk about upgrades. And so that's where the conversation can get a little bit messy.
Right, yeah, so the problem in your case specifically wasn't so much that people were against it, but rather that they weren't even looking at it, that they weren't...
That was an extent to it, and there were people who had looked at it. They'd written their own counter proposals, and then I'd seen some of them starting to include CTV in that. And so I said, okay, this as like a primitive probably has technical consensus, but maybe the community wants to activate or not, and that's up to the community to decide. But I think as developers, one of the things that's a conversation that we also have is like, do the developers prepare software and let the community decide what they want to run, or do the developers prepare software and tell the community you have to run this? When I did my release, I said, hey, look, here's software that can activate CTV. Here's software that can also not activate it. And here's software that if somebody does activate it, will fork off the network because you really don't want it. I released all of those, and I said to the community, run whichever one you think is best. And it turns out nobody ran any of it, but that's fine. But I think that's where a lot of the anger that was directed at me was really like, you should just not even be releasing anything or like trying to prepare this. You've got to go through this process. And I said, what's this process?
Right.
Nobody could define that.
Tadge, does Utreexo have technical consensus as far as you...
So Utreexo, and this was a very specific design, does not need any consensus. There are people running it. A big part of it, it's not well, it's not like, I don't want to say it's like super private, because we're working on that, but in general, you can't tell if someone's using it. So it doesn't need consensus, doesn't need a new, miners, things like that. So from a technical level, you can run it, you can have this small node, as long as some other people are using it, you're good, and the rest of the world doesn't need to know you're doing this, which I like, and it's very constraining to say, okay, I need to make this software work in a compatible way that's not detectable. That said, you want to get it more widely used and known and stuff like that, and worked on, and that's much more difficult, to the point where I'm like, I sort of talk to people working on Bitcoin Core. I'm not like, is this ever going to get in Bitcoin Core? I don't know. Like, I'm okay running a separate piece of software and say, hey, look, this isn't the same thing, right? Some people say, no, this is not a full node, because a full node needs to have the UTXO set. I'm like, oh, okay, I don't want to argue definitions. Like, I call it a full node, right? I think it's fully validating. It's got the same functionality, but yeah, it is different. Fine. Anyway, here's this thing, and hopefully it can get widely used eventually. Right. And if it gets into Core, if that matters, then great. But I'm also not, like, I'm friends with a lot of people who work on Core, and it's great, and I use it and run it, and that's where my Bitcoin are. But I don't necessarily agree with the idea that long-term Bitcoin really needs to be this one software executable that everyone runs in lockstep. I do think multiple implementations is, dangerous and risky, but feels like long-term the way you have to go. But that's just me.
Yeah. Totally.
Amiti, Jeremy couldn't exactly figure out what the technical consensus process is, if there is one. Is there one? What's your... do you know what the process is?
Oof. I think the closest you can come to nailing down specificity is calling it rough consensus. And I think that's the way that you get out of having a super explicit set of what does it mean to be in agreement. And again, it's kind of tricky, because if you define the metrics too carefully, then they can be gamified, and you can push forward changes that aren't serving the actual needs of the community or the technology. So in Bitcoin Core, it's much better defined. Tadge's shirt says ACK, and that's lingo that we use to communicate whether you support the code, the approach, the idea. And so it's a little bit better defined, but it's still a nebulous process. Changes that are of different sizes are going to need a different level of review. The amount of expertise of the person reviewing it gets factored in, because if somebody who has never showed up on the project says this looks great versus somebody who has a decade of experience on it says this looks great, those should be weighed differently. Right now in Bitcoin Core, the community is generally small enough that that reputation can be weighed in a case-by-case basis. But even at that level of a very tangible things, of PRs that are getting merged every single day, it's still a quite nebulous process. And so it becomes, an order of magnitude more complicated to say, how do we garner technical consensus on bigger changes? And also, what's the difference between technical soundness versus people saying, hey, I actually want to use this and I support this, and I'm not trying to evaluate whether or not it works or is a security leak, but I'm saying that I'm interested in it. So those lines also get really blurry, which contribute to the politics, but it's a hard problem. Yeah,
and it's ultimately fundamentally subjective, right? Because it comes down to reputations, and that's a subjective idea. How competent is someone? Someone has to make a judgment call, so it's a blurry process, as you say.
Yeah, and I think if we tried to make it completely objective, again, that would have its own set of problems.
And so I think one thing that there's another panel today also about some of these topics, and one point that Paul Stork made, who does drive chains, is that there kind of has to be some sort of due process. And I thought that was a good way of framing it, is that without a due process for technical considerations, it's both that, maybe you're going to let through, or maybe you're not going to properly consider a bad change and you're going to let it through, but there's also good changes that you might drop, and everything should have maybe some sort of standard of review that it goes through before it goes in. And it's very easy in the system where we don't have a well-defined process. It might be hard to subvert, but it might also just be constantly subverted. And I think that's something that we run a real risk of, our processes, just being driven by memes and not being driven by actual solid technical work that's scientifically explainable to people who aren't in the room when it was discussed.
Yeah, and I was
just going to ask, what's your expectation for the next Bitcoin protocol upgrade? What's the most likely next candidate? Any idea?
I can go first because I have no clue.
I can ask a follow-up question, which is as interesting.
Op Vault, but really it's OpCTV, just with a different name. I don't know. Yeah.
So then, what would be the activation mechanism? That's maybe even more controversial these days.
It's going to be a mess, just because like the last one, everyone agreed, and it's multiple years of arguing how do you get to the restaurant that everyone's agreeing to go to. I don't see it being like a quick, easy process this time either.
I was talking to Tadge and I was like, we should just do something so trivial of a change just to practice the process of activation.
People will be super against that too. Yeah.
So I think the way that it ends up working is it's just memes all the way down, and so it's going to take the army of podcasters to come in and be like, oh, this is good stuff. Why don't we have this? It's going to take somebody making hats. It's going to take everybody wearing cargo pants. Whatever it's going to be. It's just all memeing, and I think that's fun, and it's like a cool environment to be in. But I think it's not delivering the best technical results. And even though I like CTV, I'm like, I don't want it to be determined by the memes that become popular. I want it to be determined by merit-based technical considerations.
And I would say to people in the audience too, it's not a democracy. It's not this, but it is a participation kind of thing where you can make changes or you can request changes. You can bug people, and they're pretty friendly usually. I don't know, I know people who have bugged Andrew Chow and gotten something changed in how the wallet UI works. So if you're using Bitcoin Core or other software and it does something weird or it does something scary and you're like, ooh, I don't like this, I could have lost my money, or whatever, go on GitHub or wherever and mail people. And generally it works to the point where it's a little weird, where it's wait, this is some huge thing and there's so many people using it. And then any random person can be like, hey, what if you fix this? And then you do. And it's oh, cool. So, I would encourage that kind of thing too.
All right, well, we're out of time. So thanks to you guys for doing this with me, and thanks for you for being here, and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thanks.
We are back at the Bitcoin Magazine live desk presented by Marathon. I'm here with my all-star panel, and what an incredible session. Mark, what was your reflections on evolving Bitcoin's code?
Yeah, truly very interesting. I think people really are fearful of ossification because they believe it's sort of like an ideal downstream from stable monetary policy. And so they're very fearful of change because they think it's going to somehow affect this trillion-dollar asset class, right? But really it's not an ideal. It's an inevitability. And so ossification is going to come because it's a decentralized system, not because it's something that we necessarily should strive for. So I think we do need to have a lot of changes in Bitcoin in terms for scaling and privacy and a lot of these things. We'll see how the process allows that to happen.
I just think I would just comment that this is a fascinating conversation. You have a multi-trillion-dollar asset class that can basically be changed and talked about changed by regular individuals. They ended the panel actually talking about how anyone can suggest a contribution to Bitcoin Core. And that's just a fascinating thing about how this decentralized monetary network can change over time by the instincts of human beings that want it to be a better system.
I think that's completely correct, and it really is the most unique asset out there, and it's something that I don't even think humans necessarily know how to deal with. Q, I want to give you a last word.
Yeah, look, you two are by far more technical than I could ever even begin to imagine. And the sheer fact that I was just invited to email Bitcoin Core to suggest my suggestions blows my mind. But that is why this is the apex predator of all cryptocurrencies. It's not a few people deciding it. It's all of us that get to contribute in some way, shape, or form.
All right, y'all. Well, that's all the time that we have. We have an incredible next session coming up on the main stage. So don't forget to like and subscribe if you're watching online. And we will see you back here after the next session.
Thank you, Miami, for the last 3 years in this amazing city. The whole world shut down, but Miami welcomed us with open arms. We want to show Bitcoin to the whole world. We are taking the conference on the road to set the stage for Bitcoin in a new city. Nashville. Bitcoin 2024 is coming to Nashville in Tennessee, a city that is known as a music and freedom city. Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville from July 25th to 27th.